Imagine walking into a medieval village. The streets are muddy, the roofs are thatched, and there's a stream winding quietly through the town. You're thirsty, but would you dare drink the water? We often picture medieval people as dirty, ignorant, and helpless against disease. The truth? Far more complex. Yes, there were deadly outbreaks. Yes, waterborne illness was real. But here's what might shock you. They weren't clueless. In fact, they developed surprisingly sophisticated methods to make their water safer, without filters, UV lights, or chlorine tablets. So, forget what Hollywood told you. Today, we're diving deep into how medieval people actually purified their water and why their strategies might still be relevant today. There's a popular image: peasants kneeling by a filthy riverbank, scooping brown water into their mouths like animals. It's dramatic, it's cinematic, and it's mostly false. Sure, water sources were often contaminated, especially those near livestock or waste pits. But even the poorest medieval communities had basic rules about water use. They knew that upstream was safer than downstream. They knew stagnant pools bred illness. And most importantly, they understood, through painful trial and error, that not all water was created equal. Many towns designated specific water points for drinking, washing, and waste. Fines were imposed on those who dirtied communal water sources. Monasteries and cities went even further, creating entire systems to separate clean and dirty water. So, no, people weren't just sipping from sewage. And the next time someone tells you medieval people drank from the gutter, you'll know better. One of the smartest purification tricks in the medieval world? Brewing. Yes, that's right. Ale wasn't just for parties. It was a survival strategy. Why? Because the brewing process, boiling the water, adding hops, and fermenting, killed off harmful microbes. In an age before germ theory, this was a happy accident. People didn't know why it worked, only that it made them feel safer. This is why beer and ale were staples, even for children. Small beer, low-alcohol version, was consumed daily by peasants and nobles alike. It hydrated without the health risks of raw water. Some towns even paid workers in beer rations. Monasteries ran large-scale brewing operations. And when you think about it, this is an early form of water purification, disguised as a beverage. Here's another overlooked truth. Medieval people boiled water frequently, just not always for drinking directly. Soups, stews, and porridges were mealtime staples, not just because they were filling, but because they used boiled water. And that meant safer consumption. Even when people didn't drink hot water, they consumed it through food. That mattered. Especially during colder months, boiling was routine, and in many cases, it reduced their exposure to harmful bacteria. Boiled water was also used for washing babies, cleaning wounds, and preparing herbs. Again, they didn't know about E. coli or cholera, but they knew heat helped with healing and hygiene. Not all water came from rivers or rain barrels. Many medieval communities relied on springs, and they treated them with great respect. In fact, many natural springs were considered sacred. Pilgrims traveled for miles to reach certain wells, believing the water had healing powers. While some of that was superstition, much of it came from observation. These sources were clean, cool, and flowed continuously. A natural form of filtration. Communities near springs often diverted water through small aqueducts or carved stone channels, bringing fresh water into town without contamination. And there was another layer of wisdom: seasonal awareness. Medieval farmers and townsfolk collected rainwater only during clean months, avoiding early spring runoff, which was full of mud and waste, and preferring midsummer showers after the air had cleared. It wasn't luck, it was learned behavior. Here's something you rarely hear in textbooks. Some medieval people let their water sit before using it. This wasn't filtration in the modern sense, but it was effective. In monasteries and wealthier estates, collected rainwater or stream water was often placed in large cisterns or settling basins. The idea? Let the sediment, dirt, leaves, insect eggs, sink to the bottom. After a day or two, the clearer water on top was scooped off and used for drinking or cooking. It wasn't sterile, but it was cleaner. Some cisterns were lined with clay, others with stone, and they weren't secret knowledge. Medieval writings describe how to build them, where to place them, and how to keep them covered to avoid debris and animal intrusion. Yes, medieval people even experimented with flavoring and purifying water using plants. It sounds odd, but certain herbs like thyme, rosemary, and mint were added to water, not just for taste, but for their antibacterial properties. Modern science confirms that many of these plants have mild antimicrobial effects. In some regions, charcoal was placed in water jugs to sweeten the taste. Though they didn't call it carbon filtration, that's essentially what it was. Charcoal binds to impurities and can remove odors, making stale water more palatable. Again, they didn't fully understand the science, but their instincts weren't wrong. In larger cities, particularly across Islamic Spain and later medieval Italy, advanced water systems were already in place. Public fountains delivered water through gravity-fed aqueducts. In some cases, the water flowed for miles, kept moving to prevent stagnation. People filled their jugs from these fountains daily, often guarded to prevent misuse. Rome's aqueducts get all the fame, but medieval engineers carried on the tradition. In London, the Great Conduit was constructed in the 13th century to bring fresh spring water into the city center. It wasn't just convenience, it was purification through flow. A constant moving source was far less likely to breed illness than a stagnant well. Behind the scenes, knowledge of safe water use was passed down quietly, often by those who lived outside the political spotlight. Monks documented rain collection methods. Midwives insisted on using heated, clean water during childbirth. Herbalists taught others how to recognize bad-smelling or oddly colored water as signs of danger. This wasn't centralized knowledge, it was distributed wisdom, shared between neighbors, kept alive in monasteries, and learned the hard way during plagues and droughts. In other words, medieval society knew more than we think, because they had to. Of course, it wasn't perfect. They lacked microscopes. They didn't know about bacteria or viruses. And yes, people still died from waterborne diseases. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid claimed thousands. But here's the twist. For a society without germ theory, they were shockingly effective at minimizing risk. They trusted flowing water over still water. They boiled what they could. They brewed. They stored. They waited. And above all, they watched for changes in color, smell, and taste. In many ways, their system relied on common sense, community enforcement, and adaptive learning. It wasn't tech-driven, but it was deeply practical. So, what can we take from all this? In an age where most of us assume clean water will always flow from a tap, we've lost touch with the basic survival wisdom that medieval people lived by every day. Their world was fragile, unpredictable, and often dangerous. Yet they developed resilient, low-tech ways to keep themselves alive. In modern prepping and off-grid living circles, we talk about rainwater harvesting, charcoal filters, and herbal purification. But medieval people were already doing this centuries ago. They built systems around observation, tradition, and necessity. And maybe the most important takeaway is this: clean water isn't just a convenience, it's a skill. So the next time you fill a glass at the sink, pause for a moment. Think about the generations who had to fight, sometimes literally, for every drop of clean water. They didn't have science degrees or electric pumps, but they had instinct, trial, and memory. If you found this forgotten history eye-opening, hit like, leave a comment below, and subscribe for more deep dives into the wisdom of the past. Because when we understand where we came from, we're better prepared for where we're going.